Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you all to Charging Ahead, the latest developments in electric transportation. My name is Brian Wolf. I'm Chief Strategy Officer for the Edison Electric Institute, and we represent all the U.S. investor-owned electric companies. And we're really excited to partner with one of our companies today, Edison International. This is COP28's Transportation Day, so that thematically you'll hear this as you move through the blue zone and the green zone today. But I want to thank Edison International for that. I think back to when I was thinking about the panel today and the two perspectives we have, from a keynote perspective from the Department of Energy and industry perspective. I think back when Pedro Pizarro chaired our electric transportation task force, and he really is the one that brought the urgency to the industry and what part we would play with regard to the transportation sector, because the transportation sector is the largest carbon emitting sector, and Pedro saw that coming, organized our industry, and because of that, we actually launched the National Electric Highway Coalition, and that's really to meet the demand that we're going to have. They say by 2030 we'll need 140,000 fast chargers by 2030. So I just wanted to mention that and mention Pedro's leadership. We have 4.5 million electric cars on the road today. We're projected in this year alone, in 2023 alone, to have a 1.3 is the projection, 1.3 million. So I think you can see the trend here as far as the move to electric transportation, getting more out on the road, building the infrastructure that we need. And today, we have my friend, Jeff Marudian. Jeff is the Principal Deputy Secretary at the Department of Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Office. But previously, he held two other roles. In the Obama administration, he was the Department of Transportation Assistant Secretary for Administration, but he was also Chief Sustainability Officer for the department at that time. And then, after the administration, he couldn't get enough of transportation, so he went to the District of Columbia to direct their Department of Transportation. So Jeff knows just a little bit about transportation. I'd say a lot of it about transportation, and we're honored to have him with us today. So Jeff, come on up.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that very generous introduction. I'll take it. Let me just say Happy Transportation Day to all of you. It's so nice to be here. Representing the Department of Energy, I bring greetings from our Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, our Deputy Secretary, Dave Turk, who is here as well. It is particularly exciting, I think, to be here talking to EEI and to so many companies that have helped us really lead the way to implement President Biden's ambitious strategy around electrification. I want to, in particular, say thanks to EEI for a number of reasons. One, Brian, you acknowledged Pedro's leadership in this space longstanding, and we really appreciate the work that you've done over the years to help lay the foundation. I think urgency is the right word. I also want to thank you, Brian, for your incredible partnership as we were standing up the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. We really needed to think strategically about how to engage with member companies within EEI, but also across a number of other sectors. You were instrumental in that effort and helped really got us to a good footing now, and our Joint Office continues to build partnerships with industry, with states and municipalities across the country. I have the great pleasure of overseeing that work in addition to our Vehicle Technologies Office, where we've been partnering with industry for many years to drive the research and development that's necessary, not only to get to state-of-the-art charging infrastructure, but also to support the advancement in the vehicle technologies themselves. And companies like GM have been pioneering for a long time. And so it's great to be here to see all of you. I want to just share a little bit about the work that we're doing under the leadership of our Secretary Jennifer Granholm. We know that the global clean energy market is estimated to be valued at about $23 trillion over the next 10 years. A huge part of that is within the electrification space, and vehicles in particular are particularly key. We've got the unprecedented resources of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act right now at our fingertips. And what that means for us is a significant increase in our ability to generate clean electricity over the next several years. But what it also means is, as many of you know, unprecedented resources to deploy charging infrastructure across the United States. This bipartisan infrastructure law in particular provides historic funding towards programs that include really across the entire ecosystem that is necessary. That includes not only the infrastructure, not only the technologies in the vehicles, but it also includes the grid technologies that are going to power all of this new equipment. So we're particularly pleased to be able to partner with EEI as we advance this strategy. As we bring this national charging network to bear, I want to just give you a sense of where we are today, and I'll share a few statistics. I know there are a lot of statistics going around COP, but I want to just share a few that I think are worth celebrating when it comes to the work that we're doing in the Biden-Harris administration. When the president took office, he, as you know, made clean energy a priority. And as you all know, he is a staunch advocate for electrification. And as such, the president set an ambitious goal of getting to a net zero economy by 2030, which means that 50% of all new vehicles sold will be electric, supported by a network of 500,000 chargers. We are now installing chargers at 4 times the rate that we were a decade ago. In the 2010s, on average, we installed about 5,100 EV charging ports a year in the United States. Last year alone, we installed 21,000 public charging ports across the nation. The bipartisan infrastructure law has helped dramatically accelerate this trend. As of October 2023, the U.S. has more than 160,000 public charging ports. As installation accelerates, communities are taking notice that driving an EV is becoming more convenient in every part of the country. Since the start of the Biden administration, the number of publicly available fast charging ports has increased by 68%. It took 10 years for the PEV market to reach 5%, and now in just 2 years, that market has jumped to 10%. So these milestones were made possible not because of government alone. We very strongly believe, and you'll hear our secretary talk a lot about this work being led by the private sector and enabled by government. And we believe very wholeheartedly in that in order for us to achieve these goals, we have to collaborate across the entire spectrum. And so it is more valuable than ever that we build this partnership, that we further the work of DOE alongside our industry partners. And so I'm really just pleased to be here to celebrate what we've done to date, but also to recommit to the work that we know lies ahead over the next months and years as we deploy infrastructure and as we work together to decarbonize our entire economy. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to, Pedro, to your remarks and to this wonderful panel discussion.
All right, so that was our government perspective here, and clearly understanding their priorities is huge for our industry as we transition the transportation sector. But as I said, my EEI chair is Pedro Pizarro. He's also president and CEO of Edison International, and I just want to invite him up here to give his CEO perspective, but I want you to be thinking about what Pedro actually started for the industry and the work that we have in front of us. And Jeff sort of laid that out really nicely, so it's nice to hear from Pedro.
All right, thanks, Brian. You were frankly too kind, and I think we've had a lot of peers who have helped jumpstart this work. And Jeff, thanks so much for your work. It's terrific, and thanks for being here as well. Edison International is the parent company of Southern California Edison, as well as Edison Energy. Edison Energy is a non-utility subsidiary that's providing sustainability and energy management and procurement services for large commercial and industrial customers. At SCE, our utility is helping California to meet its carbon neutrality goal, and it's doing that by investing in and preparing the electric grid for electrification of vehicles and homes and businesses and pretty much most of the economy. At Edison Energy, the Transportation Electrification Advisory Group is helping commercial customers and fleet operators electrify and find integrated energy solutions to meet their needs. So I have two roles here, the Edison role, but I really like the Edison Electric Institute chair role as well. And both of those are focused on sharing industry progress, delivering affordable, reliant energy to our customers. So there's a lot of work ahead for us. And to capture the amount of work that's needed, our company released a white paper, Countdown to 2045, just before Climate Week in New York a couple of months ago. And it showed how big the task ahead is. It projects that electricity demand is going to rise by more than 80% by 2045. Part of that demand is going to come from things like 90% of passenger vehicles needing to be electric by then, 95% of buildings, space and water heating. To support all that demand, we have a lot of work ahead around renewables and storage, and especially the grid. We're going to need to add transmission at 4 times the historical rate and distribution at 10 times the historical rate. That's going to take about $370 billion of incremental investment for grid, storage, and renewables. So as part of all that, transportation electrification isn't just an opportunity, it's imperative. And every EV charging infrastructure project is a major and unique construction endeavor. SCE has its Charge Ready program that's contributing 30,000 EV chargers throughout the service area. But through that, it's also partnering with automakers and local governments and stakeholders to accelerate the transition and get the policies that are needed. For larger clients, Edison Energy is developing roadmaps that plan fleet conversion. And so the time for all of this is now. There are more than 4 million electric vehicles on U.S. roads already, and we're on pace for more than 1 million to be sold this year. By 2030, we're going to need 140,000 EV fast charging ports to support the more than 26 million EVs that EEI projects will be on U.S. roads. We're helping. We have EVs. I hope you do too. So now, this progress, however, can't come at the expense of affordability and equity. And so we're very committed to make EVs affordable and accessible for all customers. Utilities like ours offer rebates and incentives. The programs also provide infrastructure support and chargers for customers in underserved communities. The power grid ultimately is a backbone to enable and accelerate mass electrification. And the utilities that plan and design and operate the grid are a nexus for this broader ecosystem that's part of this market transformation. EEI's member companies are doing that. They're investing more than $4.2 billion to help build and deploy EV charging infrastructure and support TE programs. More than $800 million of these investments are designated for underserved communities. We have to modernize and expand the grid to make this all work. And that modernized grid is also going to be more resilient to climate impacts, more reliable in the face of increased demand, and more adaptable in responding to how energy is produced and stored and used. So electric companies, I think we are ready for the EVs that we have now, and the grid will be ready for future growth. We'll have a few bumps in the road, but we're going to get there, and we can't delay because the clock is ticking, and we need a sense of urgency around clean technology investments for this country and for the world. So thank you, and looking forward to the panel now.
Thank you, Pedro. Now that we have the government perspective, we have a CEO perspective, and now we're going to get down to business here and talk about really corporate America leading the charge too. And my good friend Caroline Choi, Senior VP of Corporate Affairs at Edison International, is going to lead this panel. And on the panel today, we have Rahana Arani Familia, and she's Vice President of Clean Energy Development at National Grid. We have Kristen Seaman, she's Vice President, Chief Sustainability Officer at GM, and Chris Blackburn, Head of U.S. Climate Policy at Amazon. So take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. Is this on? No. Okay. Thank you. It's great to have you all here today, a panel of powerful women in the transportation sector. So we'll get right into it. I'm going to start with you, Rahana. So National Grid and Southern California Edison are among a number of the EEI member companies who are putting forward their plans for electric charging. More broadly, we're looking at not new ways just to be ready, but to plan and prepare for all the electric vehicles that are coming. You recently put out a report that talked about readying the grid for the electric fleets that are brought, and that brought into clear focus the need for planning ahead, and especially around where we think the fleets are going to be deployed. So why don't you talk about the highlights of the report and what its implications are for grid planning and preparedness?
Okay. So first of all, thank you for your comments and for your leadership in the in EV. In as a utility and as a citizen, I appreciate it. We have been looking at. There is a lot of data that is coming out that is talking about the projections of number of EVs on the road or the load. But what we were seeing was that there was a miss on what that would mean to the grid at a local level. So the study that we did basically took a corridor, a highway corridor, and brought it down into the locations that were hubs for transportation and looked at the impact of electrification of not only the light duty vehicles, but also medium and heavy duty vehicles. And what we saw was that when you're looking at a trucking station in 2040 and 2045, you could be in a place that you will need as much energy in that place at peak as a small town does. And so that is a completely different dynamic than saying we have to double the whole of the grid, because it's a regional impact, which is that needs transmission level access and substations. And if you're doing the taking the peak off, so it fundamentally, you need to look at this differently. And it got us to think that for probably the first time, the transportation industry and the energy industry are coming together in a different way through the grid. So how do you start looking at this marriage, which you have created the office of the joint office, and that's a start of that. But how do you create that at the local level, at the state level, and look at planning the energy grid and the transportation corridors at the same time? So I'll leave it at that, and we can come back to the details of what we're seeing now later.
Well, Kristen, it's not just fleets that are going to need EV charging, but individual car owners as well. And you all are doing some exciting work. You just announced a partnership with Pilot, Flying J, and EVgo to build out EV fast charging at 200 locations across the U.S. So talk more about that project and how it fits into your larger plans for e-mobility.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you. So as you said, we're on a roadmap and a trajectory to an all-electric future. Our plan is to be 100% EV in the U.S. light duty by 2035, and certainly need a charging infrastructure to support that. So knowing we can't do it on our own, and we're very grateful for government commitment up to support and putting that out, but we want to be part of the solution as well. So we've announced a number of partnerships and initiatives around charging infrastructure. One that you mentioned, and we just recently announced that the first chunk of those chargers with Pilot and Flying J are up and operational. So across the major thoroughfares in the U.S. to be able to stop and have access to full, fast charging, as well as other services, restaurants, restrooms, et cetera, to really enable people to see how they can live in this EV world, particularly around, longer distance transportation as well. We've also announced or have implemented a partnership with our dealerships where if there's a statistic out there that says over 90% of the U.S. population lives within 10 miles of a GM dealership. So we've partnered with our dealerships to identify where charging stations should be implemented in their communities. So in some cases that's as a mom with boys that played sports, I said it should be at the local soccer fields and baseball fields when we're waiting for them to get out of practice. But, maybe it's a community center, maybe it's at the dealership itself or a local school, whatever it is, the dealers really have the touch point and connection with their communities like no one else does. And that gets, well beyond the the major cities and that in the U.S., which have more access. So we're really looking at how we can be part of the solution going forward.
That's great, and I think you've been a real partner. And as Rihanna said, it's interesting to have the transportation OEMs having that engagement with utilities, which is something that hasn't happened in a long time because there hasn't been a real need for that, right? So, but Chris, let's talk about Amazon because it's certainly a leader in fleet electrification, and you've been doing a lot in that space. So can you just talk a little bit about your recent electric delivery van milestones and what it means into your broader e-mobility plans?
Sure. Is this on? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you all. And thank you for the invitation. EEI has been a great partner to us. I'm really happy to be here for this conversation. Let me start with the climate pledge to give us some context. Amazon committed to being net zero by 2040 back in 2019. And we knew that this is across like all our operations. So for us, this is a big goal. That's a really hard number to hit by that date. And so we also launched the climate pledge so we could invite other companies along with us on this journey so that they would commit to the same goal on 2040 and report. And we were hoping a number of these were companies in our supply chain, right, so that we could all move together. We also launched the following year the Climate Pledge Fund, which was with a $2 billion initial investment, and it's an equity investment for startup companies that are developing the next generation technologies that Amazon needs to get to net zero, but that everybody needs to get to net zero as well. And then shortly after we launched the Climate Pledge, our first first step towards decarbonization is we really wanted to focus on our Scope 2 emissions. So we made an additional commitment to get to 100% renewable energy by 2030. It turns out we can actually move faster than we were planning, and we're on track to reach that goal by 2025. Actually, this last December, we were already at 90% renewable energy across all of our operations, and we've been the largest corporate renewable purchaser in the world for the last 3 years running, actually. So we're pretty proud of that. And then the other kind of initial step we really wanted to do to start to decarbonize was focus on our last mile. So these are the delivery trucks that are in your neighborhood that you see with the little smiley face on it. And so we started looking around trying to figure out where we could buy the trucks we needed, and there weren't any, really. We realized we had to innovate to really be a first mover in this space. So we ended up partnering with Rivian, who also joined the pledge, and it's also a fund company for us, and ended up developing a new EV custom van for Amazon delivery, pretty much from the bottom up. And then made a purchase of 100,000 of these vans, which was the largest EV purchase ever. So all of this to say that was all our progress and like kind of the starting point. But the milestone this year, which we're really proud of, is we now have 10,000 of these vans on the road in the US. It's the fastest rollout of an EV fleet at this scale. And let me read you some stats here because I think they're pretty important. They're interesting, but I won't remember them. We have delivered more than 260 million packages in more than 18,000 cities and regions across the country. We've trained over 20,000 delivery associates on our new custom vans. And just this past year alone, they've driven over 69 million miles in these Rivian vans. So we're pretty excited about the progress we've made to date, but clearly we still have a lot more to come. So we're excited about the scale up in the future.
Well, sticking to that, Amazon came to EEI early on after you placed your 100,000 van order, and it kicked off a partnership between EEI and a number of the member companies where these vans were going to be located for the charging infrastructure that was going to be necessary to fuel these vehicles. So can you talk about that partnership and what you've learned from it and what other corporates may be able to learn from the experience that Amazon has had with engaging with their utilities?
Yeah, that's great. So the minute we placed this order for these vans, we knew we needed to just as quickly build out the infrastructure in order to charge them. If we were going to have these in our fleet, we needed to be able to operate them at the tempo that our normal fleet operates, right? So we approach EEI and our utility partners to really share our growth plans for EVs with all of them so that they could understand the load growth better. And these conversations have been invaluable to us. We've learned a ton of kind of insights into how to do better planning and to move faster. I would say one of the really interesting lessons learned that we had was that we started with a plan, like with the goal for meeting customer demand and meeting future growth, right? Which are very fair goals. But we defaulted to using level 3 charging because we wanted to make sure we had complete operational efficiency and that there were no hiccups in our deliveries. But once we started talking to all the utilities, realized that this was going to take a lot longer. It was going to be a lot more expensive, and it was going to put a lot more demands on our utility partners. And so we kind of went back, reassessed, and Amazon's a data-driven company, so we're like, let's test this out. We went back, and for about a year and a half in 18 different regions, we actually tested our vans and realized that the way our operations work, that we could actually use level 2 charging, because we charge overnight at our fulfillment centers, and they work all day just fine on that charge. So we have gone back and redone our planning based on these conversations because we can actually use the cheaper, faster charging in those kind of facilities. So those are the kinds of insights that we have got from this partnership. And let me just say, to build on that, we found it so valuable that we are now hoping others will join us. In August, we launched an initiative called EV to Scale, with EEI and EPRI and a lot of others. Actually, there's a ton of partners, including the Department of Energy, I believe. And the whole goal was we were the first fleet operator to put our data into this GIS system that EPRI is building. And we're hoping that other fleet operators and manufacturers will join us so that we can they will anonymize all the data, but then aggregate demand and provide this nationwide map, but at really high resolution so that all utilities can really plan out to 2030 what the load growth is going to be. And I think this will not only allow for better assessment of lead times and energy demand, but also like the workforce requirements needed to build out the grid and costs and a whole bunch of other insights if we can get all of our data all into one place. So
That's great.
yeah.
Well, Kristen, I know GM was one of a few companies who recently announced that they're moving to the NACS charging standard. That's the one that used to be a Tesla exclusive standard, so that GM owners could access the Tesla charging network. Can you talk about what that means for your customers and what you think it means in terms of adoption of electric vehicles and the whole just effort to expand the charging infrastructure?
Yeah, for sure. So we did announce that we were going to also adopt the NACS, North America Charging Standard, which really just enables more access for our customers. At the end of the day, our purpose is around serving the customer, providing them a vehicle that meets their needs and the capability to use that vehicle to do what they need to do in their everyday life, which it revolves around charging, but also revolves around the type of vehicles that are available so that, if you need a full-size pickup truck to run your construction business, that's available, and that portfolio is super important. And I think what's important about the NACS, also we announced recently a partnership with 7 other OEMs to build out another charging network across the country. It really is about collaboration in providing that infrastructure together, whether it be the work that the government is doing, other OEMs are doing with us, et cetera. It's all about collaboration. We could go through so many different areas here that we've talked about. Renewable energy is another one that we're really excited about. We had originally set a goal for 2050 to be 100% renewable. We actually completed all the agreements last year that have everything in line to be 100% in the U.S. by 2025 as well, well ahead of, the rest of the industry. And it's important to us that in order to get to zero, we can only do that if we're charging with green energy. And so the more that we can get companies, I believe we're both partners on the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, which really enables that to accelerate. And so whether we're talking about the decarbonization of the grid and accelerating that, or the work we're doing to accelerate the infrastructure, it's going to enable this all-electric future faster, which is better really for everyone in the long run.
Great. Rhonda, you had talked about this freight quarters project, which was building on your seminal electric highway study report that came out last year. And now my understanding is that you're working with Department of Energy on a freight corridor study for the Northeast on how zero emission freight could move in the Northeast across your service area. Can you talk about that and its implications?
So, as starting from a interesting and optimistic view, I think it was last week that there was a climate report that was released in New England, and our goal for 2022 in New England has been 6,000 electric vehicles, or 60,000 electric vehicles, and we were at 71,000 by the end of 2022. And so, and then part of that study, one of the early things that we did, we had a projection of what the increase in the amount of medium heavy duty freight is going to look like. And then we went and we asked people what their plans were. And if you compared the plan with our projections, the plans were higher than our projection. So why I bring that up, I think those are two data points that show that we are at this, we've crossed the chasm on this, and we're at a place that consumers are choosing EVs. It's a consumer choice. It's not policy driven, and that rate is increasing. So the risk of that is that as utilities, without a regulation that allows anticipatory planning, and as utilities that do not closely work with the departments of energy in our states to plan the future of we would be behind, because right now it takes us 5 to 7 to 10 years to build substations and transmission. So is there a world in which the consumer demand will outpace our ability to feed that demand? And that, I think that's a real risk. Is it possible to get past that? Absolutely. But is it urgent that we work with our regulators and with our states right now? Absolutely. So in New England, one of the things that we have been doing, and I know that these are the side effects of the study and not the study itself. We started talking to our regulators and saying, we need to work together. We talked to our departments of transport and with legislators to enforce planning of the grid and the transportation electrification together. And we think these steps will help us build a more efficient grid at a lower cost, to your point about affordability for the customer at the end of the day, because we can optimize. Right now, we are on the back foot. So when companies like Amazon, they have big ambitions and they come to us, it takes us a lot longer than they expect to be able to respond to their demand. And we need to get out of this dilemma right now.
Absolutely. Well, a couple of years ago at COP, we were celebrating the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then, a year-ish later, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's interesting to see, just even in Edison's case, we just filed a rate case in May. And, previously our projections for growth were flat through 2030. And those two laws have really in the system, right? And so we were projecting 2% growth now in that 24 to 28 period, primarily driven by electric transportation, e-mobility. So can you talk about, all three of you, and maybe you could start, and what the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bill and IRA show, have done in terms of your plans and projections at your companies?
So I'll probably, the hard one, but the easy one, IRA, I think it's what it would do, to your point, it will stimulate demand. And so we need to respond to that. On the IIJA side, I think it's dollars that goes into those communities. It has, the way it has been structured, it forces collaboration because you need to partner with your state, with other utilities to be a competitive grant. It forces innovation and de-risks innovation because things that my bosses might not be comfortable with otherwise, those grants will take the risk off of them so you can start investing in more innovative. And then I would say the community benefit focus forces you to be competitive, forces you to have early, often unique, innovative conversations with the communities and co-create solutions that will work for everyone. So I think on the IIJA side, we're past the round one. We got a few grants. We got a grant and a selection of a transmission facilitation program. And I really think it's going to change the game for how we work together and collaborate within our states and with our communities.
Yeah, so from a General Motors perspective, full transparency, our plans didn't change. But it's been what we needed to keep our plans on track and really to accelerate things. You know, whether it be the tax incentives for customer purchases of vehicles, we actually have looked and we believe all of our EVs will be eligible for the $7,500 tax credit in 2023 that meet the MSRP and beyond as well. So we're really excited about that. We had already announced and started production of localizing battery cell manufacturing and production here in the U.S. And so with our partner facilities, we believe strongly in our communities where we live and work today. And so we had already been well on the path of transforming ICE manufacturing to EV manufacturing in many of the same assembly plants. But the IRA has really supported all of that, whether it be the tax credits, the production, facility incentives, or even the acceleration and support of the EV charging infrastructure. So we're really excited. We've said from day one that we can't make this transition to all electric on our own. And so it's really great to see the partnership and support across both public and private.
Yeah, I would say, again, our plans haven't changed, but we're hoping that things move faster, and I pretty much expect them to. I mean, there's tailwinds everywhere created by those bills. So I would say one of the exciting ones is like our Rivian, when we were trying to find last mile vehicles, trying to find middle mile heavy duty vehicles right now is difficult, it's expensive. So we're really hoping that the tax credits there really jumpstart the market. I mean, not just for our purchases, but for everybody to really ramp up production. I think there's a ton of opportunity in terms of the investments in innovation and bringing new technologies to scale. The idea about building out our domestic supply chains in order to really support production. And the one other thing I'll say is that we see some real opportunities, especially with some of the funding that DOE has, where our network is not just our owned vehicles. Like, we have tons of partners throughout the process, and a lot of them are small and medium businesses that, like, Amazon can pay a price premium often at the beginning in order to jumpstart the market, but costs have to come down for these others to enter the market. And so we're really looking at opportunities for like financing support and others to bring small and medium businesses to the point where they can do the capital expenditures to buy EVs and hydrogen vehicles. So I think there's just so many opportunities, and the tax credits are huge and will continue, but I think diving into all these other little programs and finding innovative ways to use that funding is going to just transform the sector completely.
You both talked about acceleration, which makes my heart skip a little bit because we're already probably in many ways not meeting expectations of some of the customers in terms of the pace at which we're moving at the utility sector. So can you talk about that in terms of what we should be thinking about utilities and customers in terms of innovative solutions to ensure that we can meet the needs of and our customers, our shared customers, in that transition to that clean electric mobility in terms of, managed charging or mobile charging or things like that that can help maybe ensure that the charging is accessible and available to customers when they need it and want it.
I guess I can start. You know, I think the decarbonization of the grid and making sure that we have reliable, resilient, you know, green energy available when we need it is critical. And you know, the carport, as we make this transition to EVs and the capability of doing bidirectional charging, making that energy, you know, those vehicles are all going to become battery, you know, energy storage devices. And so we've got to have policies and practices and standards in place that enable that across the industry. You know, I think the more that we can work to put things in place is going to be important. The utility network is challenging as they're all different, they're all unique, and we don't move fast enough. I mean, we talk about acceleration, but we also talk about how difficult it is to get new renewables you know, implemented, and we all know, right, permitting and everything else. And so I do think that that's our biggest challenge going forward, is how we can enable that. And frankly, the more we electrify, the more energy you need. And so having enough resources is going to also be challenging.
Yeah, I would completely second that. We're not just electrifying our fleet; we're, you know, electrifying all our buildings, everything, right? And we have projected load growth from just, you know, growth of operations too. So I agree, grid expansion, robustness, all of that is absolutely key. But I will also say, I think the way forward is this data sharing I was talking about, because it allows us to build smarter. Like I said, we were able to avoid the level 3 charging, but I think like middle mile transportation is a completely different entity for us, and one that I think, again, demands kind of good, smart planning now. You know, these are not trucks that would be charging at our facilities. They're going to be charging over the road. So for us to build out the infrastructure to charge them by ourselves makes absolutely no sense. I mean, the duty cycles would mean that it's, you know, not being used all the time. And so we need to figure out a way to work with other partners who are usually competitors, as well as our partner utilities, to plan out specific areas where joint charging is going to be the best investment. I mean, I think we have some ideas now where there are key areas where there are significant commercial transportation where we could do kind of these joint hubs. It would be a huge demand, but at least it would be a coordinated demand, and less than if we were all doing it ourselves. It would be cheaper than us doing it all ourselves too. So we're kind of hoping to talk to DOE and others about this idea of doing these pilot, you know, joint charging hubs as a way to work through the permitting issues and all those other kind of things that go with this, as a way to jumpstart kind of a larger network nationwide of heavy duty charging.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So right now we've got the truck stops that middle mile, I like that terminology, uses. So why not those become the hubs? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of opportunity for those existing ones to play. I think there's also, I mean, that's really long haul. When we're also talking about middle mile, we're talking about regional. So there's like, if you're talking even San Bernardino, in the Inland Empire, there are a ton of transportation companies all located in one place. I mean, I think we all back up to each other. So, you know, things like that are a no-brainer. We should be building joint charging at those locations too. So I think it's just let's all get together, figure out what network actually makes sense, and figure out a way to build them. Yeah.
I'd love to pilot with you on that. We see that need. We've certainly heard from customers like yourselves and others that are competitors of yours. And so when we think about the work that's needed for each individual customer on those circuits in the next few years, just to accommodate the individual customer's needs, I love the idea of, like, does it make sense to do something that's co-located? Yeah, yeah. So, well, it's time for audience questions, if there are any. I'm happy to turn the mic over to if there are any audience questions. Oh, do you have a question?
Are you surprised that I have a question?
Not at all.
Well, I didn't think so.
No, it's just for you two. I was on a panel, I don't know, sometime this week, I can't tell where I've been all this week, with Arshad Mansour, who's the president and CEO of EPRI. And he mentioned that EPRI and NRDC are working on a study focusing on they think the untapped potential of energy efficiency for electric vehicles, right? Looking at how the OEMs can look at designing more efficiency into the vehicle. And so, Kristen, wondering, is that on GM's radar screen at this point? And Chris, from your perspective, as you're working with Rivian or you might work with other OEMs, are you looking at efficiency, the miles per kilowatt hour? Because then that can drive down vehicle costs, it can drive down the size of the battery pack that's needed, and can drive down maybe the size of the investment on the utility side as well.
100%. I mean, so first off, as an engineer myself who spent most of my career in product development, in fact, my most recent job prior to CSO, I led our global energy team, which is basically responsible for certification, all the emission standards, basically GHG at the compliance side. So, everything from I had the Aero Development Lab and all of the work that we do. Innovation, as an engineer in a company that's based on technical and engineers, it's in our core. And a lot of times we talk and highlight and communicate and put out press releases on, big new technologies or big new features. But the small innovative steps that we make every day to, maybe take a millimeter off here to get better airflow around one area. One of my favorite examples with an ICE engine was we took the Chevrolet bow tie symbol on a Camaro and we made it hollow. And so it actually allowed more air to flow through the engine compartment because it was open. So it's very simple, small technologies like that. In fact, how we cool the batteries, right? So the airflow that we can get around that and enable us to use less cooling is less mass from, a piping standpoint. So all of those play into how much range we can get, how much efficiency we can get, well beyond the technology of the battery itself, which again, we've got a team of engineers working on every day. But yeah, that I could spend hours talking about that. That's a passion. I'm sure you want it all.
I know. I was just going to say that. Yeah, I would say, of course, we think about efficiency. We find we've already saved a significant amount of emissions purely by optimizing our logistics once we started looking at carbon as one of the factors involved in there. And so we're always trying to make it more efficient. Reduce packaging, so we reduce weight. Like all of these things can go into actually making these trucks a lot more efficient. But I will say that, yeah, we are looking, especially in the middle mile, the trucks aren't as efficient as we would like. We're still not sure if we want to use hydrogen fuel cells or electric in certain cases, probably a mix of both, depending on what it is. But we are kind of hoping for maybe some Hail Mary technology advancements like solid state batteries or something like that would make it incredibly efficient and kind of just open up a whole new world for us. So yeah, I think agree completely. But I think there's a lot of good stuff to come, I think, on the horizon.
Any other audience questions? Oh. Paul.
Hi,
I know every name.
yeah, Paul Awasmud from Sacramento, California. So I think you mentioned, the customer is actually moving sometime faster than utilities, and you express some frustration about dealing with different utilities, different standards, and different processes. So if there's one advice you can give utilities or utility industry, what would that be actually to accommodate that rapid, expansion?
Yeah.
There's a lot going through my brain, honestly. The challenge. I'm not an expert, first off, but the little bit that I do know, rate structures are different. Regulated and unregulated markets are different. Different pathways and commitments from the local and state governments are different. and we have to play with all of them. And so having to interface and build a plan around that, and frankly, there's different priorities. And so, you know, we're trying to merge what we're doing as everything we're doing, and I'm sure the same is basically true for Amazon and others, is additional, you know, additionality to the grid. So it's all great, but it's small. We need plans in place that drive, you know, the existing infrastructure. What's that roadmap to green? What's that roadmap to, you know, resilient and reliable? So it's really hard because they're all unique.
Yeah, I would just agree with that completely. Again, I feel like
That's good. That's good. I mean, we have the same challenge.
But the one thing I will add is that I have seen a couple of utilities proactively put out plans, or actually almost like guidebooks, saying, knowing that you know, fleet operator like you is coming in and trying to do this. Here are the things you need to be thinking about. Here's how we go about it, instead of putting it on the onus of the customer to figure out all the different processes. It's been helpful when they're like, we get what you're trying to do. This is how you have to do it with us, right? So, I mean, it would be best if everybody was the same, but at least they can be transparent and open about kind of all the different processes we'd have to need. I mean, that's one thing that has been useful.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to reiterate if we can get to some level of standards around bidirectional charging and how that rate structure works, how it works technically, what's the data stream, and there's collaborations that are happening. We're working with Amazon and Google and others on that. That'll be really important so that we can actually take full advantage of the energy that's available.
Hello, I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I'm a city planner and chair commissioner with the Vancouver City Planning Commission and a part of the Canadian Pavilion. A quick question about rural equity and looking at charging across rural communities. What sort of programming are we seeing with regards to co-renting across rural municipalities, e-vehicles, and then also the rollout of charging stations to make sure that we've got electrical autonomy across, the United States and also across Canada, just being a larger landmass as well?
Do you want to talk
I
about
can
the,
start.
and then I'll.
Yeah, no
I'll-
problem. So charging accessibility or availability is important, and that, you know, that's part of the logic of the dealer initiative that I mentioned, because they are in rural areas as well. You know, reality being also that most people still charge at home and work, and so, you know, looking at what the range of a vehicle is and what's really needed from an infrastructure. Part of the challenge today is people, and I'll use my parents as an example. My parents drive basically to my house, and is about the farthest they go, which is maybe 20 miles, 25 miles, right? And they are so nervous to get an EV because they're used to seeing a charging station on, a gas station on every corner or along the route, versus they wouldn't need it for 2 weeks, And so some of it's education. It certainly is something that's being looked at, and how, that's why it's important for us to work with local communities and states to understand, where the challenges are and where the bottlenecks are. But, the range of the vehicles and the technologies that are available today, we don't need as much as people think we do.
And I would just add, I don't know how in Canada and Vancouver specifically, but in New England, we have mandate to deploy, for example, 32,000 right now. So we would take that, and then we would make sure that that's an equitable spread, and that our EJ communities at least get 40% of the EV charging. I would add to that it also needs to coincide with the need of those communities. So which communities actually need the EV charging, and the rural point that you mentioned, it's probably not as big of an issue for us in New England. It's a smaller landmass than British Columbia is. but definitely the number of miles between EV charging hubs, that's something that we look at, especially when we look at our planning. So that's part of the consideration and design.
I'll just add, similarly to National Grid, we have similar mandates. So for the programs that the utility is responsible for, it is a requirement to put a percentage of that money. And for us, the minimum is 40%. We've seen in our program about 50% of the money going into disadvantaged communities, and that includes our rural, underrepresented communities. We are looking at where the need is, and so right now the need is higher in our urban areas, but we are also planning in those more rural areas. We're also seeing, actually it's Tesla is one of the customers that's really done a lot in those rural areas. So for instance, from LA to Las Vegas is a very common drive. It's about 4.5 hours. Once you leave the LA metro area, it's pretty rural. But they've put charging stations, pretty large charging hubs along that path because they know how many of their owners want to drive to Las Vegas and want to feel comfortable that they will have electric vehicle charging along that path. And now that they're opening that network up to non-Tesla owners, I think that's just an example of where Tesla has planned, and that's using data from all their owners, figuring out where they need to be putting their chargers, and it's been a very good partnership. It's been work for the utilities, but some of those rural networks are also they have less capacity, right? So they're more rural, so they're smaller wires, and so it's the upgrades that the utility has to do to accommodate that charging, especially as we think about growing loads in those areas. Any other questions? Oh, we are at time. So I just want to thank this panel and hope you have a great rest of your COP. Thank you.